Today we're talking about architecture firms and design build firms. Not generally though, specifically the firms I worked for and the projects I worked on. The first part includes work I did for instructors of mine during summers at architecture school. There was some work I did for my grad school instructor named Fu Dong right after graduating, which I couldn't find, so I couldn't include that. Then we look at 4 different firms I worked for after graduating but before getting licensed. There's some solo work, but we're not going to look much at that. And then we have NextGen Vision and NinthGen Consulting, which is where I'm at currently. I did a video a few weeks ago called Every Project I Did in Architecture School, and I showed this cabin that was a collaborative project with myself and Arthur Bedalian. Our instructor, Clark Stevens, hired both of us to work for him the summer after that studio, and he provided us really great sketches of what he wanted digitized. This is his sketch of the site plan, elevations and roof plan. We handed our digital work back to him, I think in a couple days, knowing there were going to be additional comments. And sure enough, they came back to us with a lot of red lines. So we revised our work, added the cistern to the elevation, sent it back. Here's the section drawing. Rendering we did of the rear of the project, which has Corten steel, stucco, masonry, glass. Here you see the entry and the tree trunk being used as a column, which I don't think we asked them about, but looking at this now, I have quite a few questions about that. So the software we used for this was Rhino for the 3D modeling and drawings, Maxwell for the renderings, and we superimposed those over photographs of the actual site. This was a competition entry called Suburban Archipelago. The site was Venice, Italy. Summer after 4th year, my instructor Eric Olsen was working with other instructors Paulette, Singley, and Berenika, Boberska on this proposal for Venice, and they hired me for some assistance, and it was a really fun experience. We were in the studio space of the architecture school, working on this as a team. After I finished my B.Arch and MS degrees, I interned under Tom Wiscombe. When I first joined, we were starting to work on a competition entry, and he had each intern take jacks or crystals and rotate them, scale them differently, and arrange them to come up with a massing strategy for the project, so he can go around and pick one to use for the project. One day I came back from lunch and there was a note on my desk that said Aura, Batwing, Black. And I asked the guy next to me, Roberto, what does this mean? And he was like, I don't know, I don't get notes like that. So I asked Tom and he told me to get black spray paint and spray paint this thing black. And I spent a couple days on that because this thing was massive. It was like 7 or 8 feet tall and had a lot of nooks and crannies to get the spray paint into. The first couple coats didn't want to get the whole thing uniform. This was a competition entry for Adelaide, Australia, and I drew this site plan and this floor plan. At first, everyone was kind of working on everything, and one day I asked him if I could do renderings and post-production for renderings in Photoshop, and since then he put me on 2D drawings, plans, sections, elevations, site plans. This image Tom called The Machine. We had a guy from China interning with us who worked on this one. Roberto did this image, and Dylan Weiser was doing these renderings. There was a strategy that I thought was really cool that Tom had us implement, which was having these lines and having the light project onto the form and tattooing them into the form. After that, we worked on this project in the Old Bank district of Los Angeles. This was an addition to the rooftop, again with tattoos onto the skin, and we used some ZBrush along with Rhino and Maya to get the tattoos mapped onto the surfaces properly. Aside from this pavilion on the roof, there were exhibition spaces in the basement and other parts of the building that we were adding into the program. I was setting up the initial files for these floor plans in Rhino, and we were doing the line weights directly in Rhino instead of having to export it into Adobe Illustrator and do that there. This was a competition entry for a museum in Moscow, Russia, called the National Center for Contemporary Arts. And Tom was really against the mesh of the form that the software gave us being embedded into it at all. So again, we implement the tattoo strategy. This ended up being mapped over the surfaces. I had done a short animation of the composite parts being shipped to the site through helicopters using the software Maya again. This is what our proposal ended up looking like. Some of the figures in the sack squish in from the outside and some squish out from the inside. Here is the machine and another diagram showing the object, the ground, and the land. Then I did some freelance work for Atelier Hitoshi Abe. I did these renderings for a large housing project with, I don't remember how many units, like 40 units or something. And I did these renderings of a single family residence for a land design studio. After that, I worked for LOC Architects. LOC stands for Line of Control. Under Ali Givenchy, I worked on this residence in Santa Barbara, and looking on their website, I see it's built now, which is pretty cool. We had the overall floor plan and massing strategy pretty early, but we went through a lot of iterations until selecting this one and honing it to the end product. These iterations were made in Rhino, but the majority of the work we did was in Revit. This was a school renovation we were working on. I believe it's a private high school. There's a ceiling plan, sections of the wall, diagrams showing when the wall takes which angles. It was a pretty interesting project, and looking at the website, it looks like this one is built now too, which is really cool. It's got some exposed structure, exposed mechanical system and electrical system. This is the shell of the building, which was existing that we'd worked within. This was a competition entry, again through LOC Architects. This image was mostly a Photoshop composite. Another school project we worked on the bottom it's a few screenshots from the Rhino model that I threw in there, and on the top it's a rendering we did. I'm not sure if this one is built. This was a renovation project in Chinatown, Los Angeles that I worked on. There's a screenshot of the PDF with corrections on it. This one also was made in Revit. The space has a lot of operable walls, which is pretty cool. It can be closed off to be completely private or opened up to be an open gallery space. The client was an artist. I believe her name was Annie, if I remember correctly. Here's the exterior, which we didn't do much to. Most of the work was inside. There's Ali on the left and me with my crazy hair on the right. We were working on an art installation here, again in Chinatown on Chungking Road. I pulled this image out of my Instagram archives. Then I went back to being an intern. I went to Neil Denari's office. I worked on wrapping up this 3D model and some of the renderings of the project. And after being trained on the behavioral tendencies of Neil and Denari Architects, I got to design this little pavilion on the roof. The skin had these really cool metal panels that were sometimes solid and sometimes perforated. And the shade and light would change throughout the day, and the building could have multiple different readings. And we saw that based on the time of day that we set the rendering to. There was another intern who was working on the interior renderings, which also came out really cool. I love the large skylight in the center there. Neil had me work on a version that was in the rain with the reflective ground that I thought came out pretty cool. By the way, it was mandatory for Neil for the renderings to have the verticals be perfectly vertical, and there were some process renderings that I was still working on that he opened up that weren't just right, and I wish I would have gotten to it faster. They also had me do these diagrams on the left where we show the operations that led to the form of the building, and those were first done in Rhino and taken to Illustrator to add color and line weight. It was one of those aerial views on the right that he had opened up, and I noticed the angle was kind of off. But of course I did eventually get around to fixing it. Then I did some solo work that we might look at in a future video. But today we'll look at the collaborative projects I did during this period. This cabin was designed by Arthur Bedalian and myself. We chose to do an A-frame to have an interesting form with less surfaces and more steep angles. We used Rhino and Maxwell and Photoshop. Arthur and I also did this competition entry for a blue clay spa. We used rammed earth exterior walls, which we thought would be fitting for the context and the program. Most recently, I'm with NextGen Vision, and we're doing a lot of projects in the greater Los Angeles area. Houses, additions, accessory dwelling units, junior ADUs, SB9s. Type 5 structural documents, and we're all Revit, so it's pretty efficient to get the project documented. You can catch me live streaming these sessions on Twitch. At first I was only live streaming what I was doing that had kind of funky geometry, but lately I decided to stream pretty much everything, so follow me on there if you're on Twitch. Subscribe, hit the bell, like, comment. There's more content on the screen. Check out the Architects mixtape. Check out my mnemonic device series for building systems for the architect registration exam. There's also a podcast on my channel with Nikos and Anne, and some of my design process and overall life stuff, and a whole bunch of content and more coming. Peace, thanks, love to y'all. Catch y'all soon.